Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to our Sunday School online. I hope I find you well. Do you remember what we learned last week? Today, we are in our final lesson of this series. So I hope you listen and you will be ready to answer some of the questions that I'm going to ask. But for now, let me talk about how do you celebrate. Let's say you have worked so hard and the thing that you have been working for, you have finally got them. Or maybe it's your birthday. How do you celebrate? Well, some of you have said music, some of you have said food, and some of you have said they celebrate by watching a movie or something like that. Right, but today we are going to see how the people of Jerusalem celebrated what God had done for them. Remember the story. It started when Nehemiah was told about the torn down walls and the burnt gates, and he cried about it and he was so sad. And we also walked through how he went to ask the king. Well, the king saw his sad face and actually was willing to help Nehemiah. And he went on to gather the people, to start the building, to gather the building materials, and he continued with the hard work. And there was also not enough food, and he changed the laws. The usual law was that the governors and everyone was getting a lot of food, but he changed that when he was a leader. So he did not take, he also asked the rich people not to take money from the poor, and everyone was happy, and people started working hard on the walls. And when they were working on the walls, we also saw that there were people who were mocking Nehemiah and all the people who were working on the walls. And these people, they were distracting the work. They didn't want the work to continue. But it did, and today we actually see that the wall has been built and everything has been done. The city gates have been put in place. Everything is in place. So it takes us to the final series of this lesson, where we see the people celebrating the hard work they had put in building the wall and the gates. Right. Our reading is from Nehemiah 12, verses 27 to 47. Well, because our reading is quite long, I'm just going to retell the whole story. The title of that story is The Dedication of the Wall. So the people of Jerusalem had completed the wall, and the Levites were sought from all over to come to Jerusalem to celebrate and to dedicate the wall with songs of thanksgiving and with the music of harps, cymbals, lyres, and the musicians were brought together from different regions and different villages to come and play at Jerusalem. So all the people went there, and the priests and the Levites, they purified themselves in a ceremony of washing or purifying the people. They also purified the gates and the walls. The leaders the leaders of Judah went up on the top of the wall, and they were assigned two large choirs with them to give thanks. Two large choirs to give thanks. And one was to proceed to the top of wall to the right towards the dung gate. And we also saw that the other one was led by Hosea towards the other side. He had different people with him, who were also priests. They were to blow trumpets in celebration. We also saw that some of the musical instrument which was given by David, remember David, the man of God, they had their teacher, the teacher of law, who was Ezra, who led that procession he was leading. And on the fountain gates, they continued in that direction to the city of David on the ascent to the wall. And they went to the side of David's palace to the gate called Water Gate, which was on the east. And the second choir, like we said, went to the opposite direction. And we know Nehemiah followed them on the top of the wall. Together with half of the people, they passed the Tower of Ovens to the broad walls. The choir that gave thanks then took place in the house of God, and as well as half of the officials. Right. We know that on the day they offered sacrifice, they rejoiced because God had given them great joy. And the women and the children also rejoiced. The sound of rejoicing was heard all over in places far from Jerusalem because people were shouting and were merry. At that time, some men were appointed as clerks of the storerooms for the contribution and the first fruits as well as the tithe, where the portions were given and as required by the law. Right, they performed the service of for God, and they also performed the service of purification and the music and the gatekeepers and everyone according to the commands of David and his son Solomon. For how long? For a very long time, as it was in the days of David and Asaph, they were directors of music. So these musicians were in charge of these songs of praise and thanksgiving. Right. So from our reading, and our portion of discussion, we will need to remember some of the people's names and some of the events that took place for us to answer the questions. Right. I'll need you to listen carefully, and I'll give you the answers at the end of the question. What was the occasion being celebrated into today's passage? They were celebrating the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem. Right. Who were invited to this occasion to celebrate? Okay. So we know a lot of people were invited, and we find that in verse 27, where it says the Levites were sought out from all over. Okay. So those were the people who were invited to come and celebrate. Where did the Levites singers come from? Okay, there were regions that the musicians specifically came from. Nepophysis is one of those regions where these musicians came from. It was a region around Jerusalem. Right, my fourth question. Name two musical instruments that were used in celebration. We said the cymbals and harps. Okay, they were used in the playing of music. Who did Nehemiah take up to the top of the city? Right. And we find this in verse 31. If you have your Bible, open on Nehemiah 12, verse 31, where it said, I heard the leaders of Judah. So the leaders of Judah went to the top with Nehemiah. Right. Let's move on to another question. Who was the teacher of law? You'll find the answer in verse 36, where it says, Ezra, the teacher of law, led the procession. So Ezra was the teacher of law. Right. Let's look at our last question for the day. Right. According to whose instructions did the singers and the temple guards carry out their job? Yes. It was according to David and Solomon's instructions that they carried out their duty. Right, done with today's reading and today's quiz. Let's think about how we as young people feel when we celebrate something. How do you feel when you celebrate something in your life? Well, we mostly feel excited, joyful, and we like the feeling of celebration. Now, let's look at how God's people celebrated. We are told that the people gave thanks. They sang as they dedicated the walls. This is the way that we should celebrate in a godly manner. So our celebration should not disturb the next person. How do you then give thanks to the Lord? How do you give thanks to the Lord? Yes, we give thanks to the Lord by honoring Him and also by recognizing the good things that He has done in our lives. So we have every reason to pray to God and to thank God for. Think of the ways that we can also honor God in our times of praise and celebration. So as you think about that, let's move on to our song of the day. Our song of the day is called Celebrate Jesus, Celebrate.
Celebrate
you sang that song with joy as we celebrate Jesus. We need to dedicate ourselves, just as the people of Israel dedicated the walls to God. We also need to take time to dedicate ourselves to God. How do we do that? We can do that by offering ourselves to God. We need to reflect in silence now about how we can dedicate ourselves to God. Right. I hope you have looked at the way you have been living and the way that God wants you to live. So this time you need to think about how you want to change the things that you've been doing so that you can do the godly things. Now, let's talk about the place and the use of music, song and dance and clapping in worship. We use music in church, and also remember there is also music that is used in the world. Both music can be exciting, but we need to look at what we learn from the music that we listen to. Does it honor God? Right. So the music that we need to listen to should honor God, because we can worship God through the music that we sing or listen to. We need to appreciate the way people worship. People worship differently, but we need to learn from one another. Some, they clap their hands while they are singing. Some play instruments. All this is a way of worshiping God. People worship God in a different way. People worship God in different ways. So we need to understand and appreciate how others worship God. Right, just a quick recap of today's lesson and how to go about it. These are the final words. Right, we start with the bad news. Remember the bad news, everything is in ruin and things are down. Nehemiah is a cupbearer working for the king. He's got all the goodies in the king's palace, but he shows up with a sad face, and the king asks him why he was sad. He told the king, and the king listened to his request. By night time, Nehemiah goes to inspect the walls. He traveled to Jerusalem in dark to inspect the walls. Nehemiah encourages the officials and the people to work on the walls because God had answered his prayers. So he gives them the assurance of the protection and the help they needed. Right, all the people join in. The Bible records how everyone joined in and worked on their piece. Right? Then there is a tummy grumbling. The ordinary people came to Nehemiah grumbling that they did not have enough to eat. Nehemiah gets angry with the officials because they are not looking after God's people. The officials are taking all the food, and the officials are sorry for they realized the error that they were making and promised to share just like Nehemiah. The job is completed in spite of all the troubles from their enemy. They finished the war in a record time of 52 days. Wow, that was God with them. And this is why they were worshiping God and praising God in songs. So we see that whatever we do, we can do it through Christ to strengthen us. Into today's memory verse It comes from Nehemiah 5, verse 9. We honor our God by the way we live. Boys and girls, I hope we will honor God by the way we live. Having said that, it's bye for now.